I think very welcome to everyone to this webinar on decent housing. I would just like to give a super brief introduction. We are the Asia Europe People's Network, People's Forum. We have been working for more than 20 years together with social movements, NGOs, etc. And we think that is extremely important because, of course, Europe and Asia are very different. But we do have, and all people have, the same needs and the same concerns. They will be met in different ways, but there is this general framework within which we want to work for another world. And that is why we work in different thematic clusters like democracy, human rights, trade, environment, and we are the Cluster for Social Justice, and I'm proud to say that with Mina Menon, we are the co-conveners of this social justice cluster. As cluster, we have made a global charter for social protection rights, and that is the general framework within which we work. Again, because we live in a very diverse world, and we want and need to respect that big diversity, but within a general framework of social and economic rights. And if we speak here of housing, you may think this is not a matter of social protection, but it is. And it is what the COVID crisis has shown us so very clearly. We are interdependent, and we need so much more than just doctors and hospitals. We need clean air, we need clean water, we need housing, especially when we talk about lockdowns. So these are the points that will be discussed here in this webinar, because the one thing that we have seen in the many years that we have been working together is that all these topics are interlinked. You cannot speak about social justice if you have no environmental justice, if you have no economic justice, if you have no fair trade. So these points all are linked together, and housing, therefore, is an extremely important point for social justice. So I gladly give the floor to Mina, who will moderate this webinar. Success.
Thank you, Francine. So yes, welcome to the Housing Roundtable, which will focus on campaign for decent housing, public services, sustainable habitat. And in this webinar, we have a focus on Asia, because the idea is to build a campaign with a focus on Asia. So we treat this as another step forward. We have been working on this for a while, another step forward. And this, we are happy to see that so many people have come in to become part of this discussion. Some of our speakers, I think, are missing. We will know as we go on. For one, my co-chair, my co-moderator is, they are suffering from a blackout in her office, so she's not able to join me, Eliza from Rujak. Well, when she comes in, then we can welcome her. But now I would like to start by saying a little bit about some of the things that we will take as granted when we start this, because this is a roundtable and not really a webinar which is just looking at the issues and trying to get clarity insofar as positions are concerned. Some of these positions we are taking as read, because many of you, most of you in fact, have been part of discussions in the past on these issues with us or without us. But there has been, over a period of time, on some issues, there has been a kind of a clarity, you could say, with all the groups that have been working on urbanization, on housing, on related. So we know there is a crisis in terms of decent housing, public services, and sustainability at all levels in Asian cities, especially in the major metros. So what is true in the metros will soon be true also of the smaller cities, which don't look as if they're suffering from them right now, because the same development model is in play. So we know that the bigger the cities grow, the less these cities are becoming sustainable, and life in these cities is also becoming sustainable, which has an impact on all kinds and all classes. And it's not just the poor, but all kinds of people who are affected. Despite that, there doesn't seem to be any attempt to pick ourselves out of that hole. And we need to look at why and what we can do about it. Therefore, looking at alternative policies, at radically different models in the provision of housing is badly needed. And if governments, including local governments, are not paying attention, we too, as think tanks and activists, have not been able to consistently campaign for new paradigms in urban development, or even come together to come to a common agreement on what these could look like. On these, we do not have an agreement. But the need for a campaign and the need to build a campaign does need more exchanges amongst ourselves, because many of these things we do not have a clear idea as to how to go ahead. I'm not saying that there could be one alternative. We have a huge diversity in terms of history, demographics, economic activity, political situation. So all these will have to be taken into consideration when we look at alternatives. However, discussion on these in the diverse situations in which we are working has become very... Sorry, somebody needs to mute their mic. I'm not sure whose it is, but please mute your mics, or host, please mute everybody's mics. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Could you mute, please, Chandan? Yes, thank you. So two important underpinnings that we are taking as read in this discussion, I'd just like to go over that. One is that a home cannot be viewed purely as a market product, and the kind of market approach that we are being treated to all the time, this is something we need to perhaps move away from. And secondly, a home cannot be a home unless it has all civic services provided and social and physical infrastructure provided. So an approach that has has all kinds of social protection as its underpinning needs to have public transport, roads, health facilities, education, open spaces, etc. Otherwise, we cannot consider that a sustainable alternative. Unfortunately, most housing movements are still fighting for the most basic right, the right to stay, especially for the urban poor, who are, or most of them, living in informal settlements, the right to remain where they are, and the right to be able to build in situ. But we also have to see that the quality of these housing colonies is also very bad. There is no provision of hospitals or regulation of rents, for instance, of poor people living within those colonies on rent, not just those who own them. So we do need to think, we need to demand more, we need to aspire for more, and we need to explore how we can go ahead on that. I don't know whether on all of this we have an understanding, we have an agreement, but if we can agree that there is need for discussion, there is need for coming together, and for that, can we build an Asia level a platform in order to take this forward, while also looking at Europe, also the examples and the experiences of Europe, to also to learn from, to critique and to learn from. It's not as if it will be a purely Asia thing, but the need to do this as Asians seems to be very, very important. So the number of speakers we have are many, so we are going to be very strict with regard to our time so that everyone can speak. But I would request people not to talk mainly about the experiences in their own countries, no, but to look mainly at, is there need to come together? What is the kind of coming together that you see as useful? What are the issues you think we should take very briefly? And whether you think that a policy level, campaign level coming together, a platform is important. That is what we should mainly focus on. We have two main speakers because some of our other speakers, I'm not sure whether as they come in, we haven't heard from Somsuk, I think for Asian Coalition for Housing Rights, but we will wait. The second speaker is Rebecca, who is here, and Yolande is here. So let me start with Rebecca. Rebecca is from Habitat for Humanity, and she is the Asia Pacific Manager for Housing and Land Policy at Habitat for Humanity. Rebecca.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mina, for the introduction. Yeah, very important issues that you have raised there regarding the campaign. I think it's really quite interesting that, I mean, all this time we are still talking about the same thing, the housing crisis and so on. And I think many times we seem to be taking a step forward, one step forward, and then we take again another step backward. And I think for me, especially, not just for me, but I think for many of us also here, I think COVID really demonstrated to us how urgent it is more than ever that we need to focus on housing. We saw how it was such a huge challenge for many countries. People asked, you know, you need to stay at home to save lives. And sometimes those homes that actually people were living in were even more dangerous, you know, more harmful to their health than even the COVID itself. So I think if there's any time that I think we all need to come together, really, I think this is a defining moment, and I think we all need to come together. And I think there've been many things that have been done, but I think it shows us that I think there needs to be different ways to address this. We cannot look at housing in isolation. We saw how COVID was not only just a health crisis, but also an economic crisis. So how do we kind of address the two? How do we address both the economic part and the health part? I think many times I always look back and I remember the situation in India, particularly the situation of the migrant workers. Many of them who, you know, when lockdown came in, there was the order for the lockdown, and many of them lost their jobs. Many could not afford to continue staying in the city, so it became too expensive. So they had to, you know, leave and walk long distances, you know, to go back to where they live. And many of this was also, apart from just the fact that they lost their livelihoods, but also there's the issue of housing security. If we look at the Indian government, for example, I think they've been working for many years to try and bridge the gap between the supply and demand for housing, especially by the urban poor. But again, we see that for many years there's been a huge focus on ownership. So there's been more focus on ownership as opposed to, for example, rental housing. And we see that many people, I think I saw some article that literature was talking about, I think in India, only 30% actually are people who own land, but all the other almost 70% are people who are kind of transitional. They only come to the cities for work, but then they go back to the rural area. So there seems to be a huge gap in addressing rental housing, and particularly rental housing, which is affordable for the poor. So how do we address this? I think at some point, I think in India, they tried to put in place the Rental Control Act at some point, but I think this was not very popular because it disincentivized many homeowners. So how do we see ways that in which we can address this in terms of balancing, you know, the needs of, say, the private sector in terms of making profit, but at the same time also being inclusive, because I think how do we ensure that we are more inclusive so that then, you know, more people can be brought into to be able to afford the housing? You know, what kind of, you know, policy and legal, you know, frameworks do we need to look at, whether we are providing housing from the private sector or even the informal sector in the informal sector, but how do we work together in terms of how to address this? So I think the issue of inclusion and equity is very important as we address these issues. But again, also at the same time, we also need to look at the economic kind of impact of some of these things. And also how can we use housing itself also as a driver for the economic recovery? I think we look at it right now. We see that, you know, in housing itself, we have housing construction, which can be a huge job creation opportunity. Also at the same time, also the generation of demand for materials and services, which can be a huge job creation opportunity. So I think, you know, we need to look at this in terms of
think it's fresh.
The studio should intervene. There's a problem there.
Yeah, I think so. She has some connection issue. Meena, we can't hear you. Yeah.
I'm sorry. There was a connection issue, but I'm back now. So can we move on? Thank you very much. And I'm sorry because I think my connectivity also is kind of spotty today. And I have been having some problems even in the last session. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rebecca, for being very brief and putting the main issues, the talk of rental and what you said about India. And that's not just about India. I think all over Asia, looking at rental is very, very, very important. And not much in the limelight of policy formulation. Yes, thank you, Rebecca. And now I will call upon Yolande Hendler from Habitat International Coalition. She is the General Secretary, the global network of the right to habitat and social justice. Through solidarity, networking, and support for social movements, HIC struggles for gender equality, environmental sustainability, and social production of habitat. So, Yolande, over to you. And you have, I'm sorry, I did not make my the time limit very clear, just 3 minutes, and because we have a whole number of people to speak, sorry. So the main issues that you would be interested in, the main thing that you think is important for us to come together on. Yolande.
Thank you very much, Meena, and thank you for having HIC present too. So what are possible key points for a campaign for decent housing that HIC has considered? Firstly, in terms of the context, COVID-19 has highlighted how new and old mechanisms of dispossession and homelessness making continue. As we know, COVID-19 has had asymmetrical impacts across territories, but many policy responses were place blind and uniform. As we know, the crisis has strikingly exposed inequality across people and places. It bears implications for governance, with citizens' trusts either decreasing or, for example, increasing. And to a certain extent, life after COVID-19 will be life with COVID-19. So there is a need really for long-term approaches that take into account better different needs and power asymmetries. If we look at some European trends just briefly, the homeless population in the EU has grown about 70% over the last 10 years, with around 700,000 people in need of shelter. So within Europe, to some extent, COVID-19 has given new impetus to reduce homelessness. But what will happen after the pandemic? What we have seen within Europe is that for years, housing issue, which has either been ignored or dismissed as too hard to solve, was actually addressed in a matter of weeks, suggesting that if the political will is there is a way. A third aspect to consider is that this COVID-19 pandemic has been a worldwide pandemic of housing evictions too. So we look at examples, which I can't go into detail here in Spain, Brussels, Scotland, which have all acknowledged interventions that have saved many lives and put bans on housing evictions. But the responses to the COVID-19 pandemic have been short-term fixes and fall short of truly addressing a broken housing system. Governments across Europe need to show real vision and bold leadership to take the necessary action that is so urgently needed. I'll conclude with a look at what some permanent solutions could be. If the pandemic is an opportunity to rethink policy on vulnerable people and housing, several bold steps are required to firstly protect tenants and provide security for citizens in rented accommodation. Secondly, banning evictions for tenants living in municipally owned properties. Thirdly, banning evictions for residents, both public and private. Fourthly, freezing rent so that landlords cannot increase it until after a set date. Providing financial support for low income tenants. Putting home repossessions on a hold, reclaiming city centres and returning holiday lets to city residents, protecting access to utility services, and then of course another key gap concerns the protection of home-based workers, particularly in South Asia, which amount to more than 61 million women and men. And then lastly, to fight deep-set trends such as housing financialization. And this remains critical across both Europe and Asia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yolande. Thank you for keeping to time as well. Yes, so I hope that the other panelists are also noting what earlier panelists are saying so that they can respond to that as well when they speak, because we have very little time. We will not have time for another round of discussions after this is over. So please make your points if you want to respond, and then you can respond again when you speak. You won't be able to respond again, but you can respond when you speak. I will now call upon Enrique Villanueva. Eric, he is part of the AEPF Social Justice Cluster, and he's Program Director of Institute for Popular Democracy based in the Philippines. Eric, you have 2 minutes, so please be very brief.
Eric, you're muted. You're muted.
Eric is muted. Eric,
Okay.
you're muted.
Okay. Yeah, the first thing that it's emphasizing is that housing is a human right, basic human rights, upon which the enjoyment of other rights depend. Government should be bound to ensure that this right is realized through actual programs and actual targets. So there must be a variety of ways to approach the housing gap. Government must be mainly responsible to provide adequate shelter for those too poor to participate in the housing market, and those affected by disaster, which are becoming more common due to climate change. Even those above the absolute poverty line, but still in the low-income segments, needs public support since the housing market is skewed against them. Such socialized housing may be created by public financing at prepared interest rates and by mandates on private developers to produce adequate housing at socialized prices. The drawback of public housing in the Philippines particularly is that urban poor are being relocated to distant resettlements Where housing is inadequate, essential services are lacking, and access to jobs is difficult. So, socialized housing need not be publicly provided all the time. Financing and regulatory support must be put in place to encourage community-led or people-led housing. This would still go to this. They will still need to access public uh, financing, but planning, implementation, and post-implementation management are in the hands of the people themselves through associations such as housing cooperatives and the urban poor. Our network, Kilos Morales, has been able to secure public financing for community-led housing for 10,000 informal settler families since 2012. So this is the last part. Industries, infrastructure development, climate change, pandemic disease, and other large-scale forces bear upon or negatively impact the right to housing. To address this, civil society cooperation in Asia is crucial. We need to raise specific standards for social housing as a mitigating and protective measure that we can tackle with state bodies on official development assistance. Let us work together for a stronger network for housing in Asia. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Eric. I will call now upon Sofia Torres, who is coordinator of the Global Platform for the Right to the City. The platform is an open, diverse network of civil society and local government organizations committed to political action and social change through the promotion of the right to the city. Sophia, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mina, and thank you everyone for the invitation and for the previous ideas and speakers. So I would like to react a little bit to what was previously said and also to introduce some ideas to a common campaign on the right to housing from a social justice point of view, from the perspective of the right to the city. So I think that from what has been previously said, I would like to highlight 2 key main ideas that had a lot to do with the right to the city vision that we defend. And the first of them, of course, being the need to dismantle this view of housing as a market commodity and putting forward housing as a right. And the second, at the same time, really highlighting the need to actually the indivisibility of the right to housing to other rights. The need for really having a comprehensive approach in which housing can't be dissociated from the access to basic services and the overall enjoyment of opportunities in cities and human settlements. And while these 2 key points are very, very important for the right to the city approach, because I think 2 of the cornerstones of the vision of the right to the city is this need for a comprehensive and overall intertwining of different rights that can't be dissociated, and also really the look of the importance of the realities in the territory, that these rights are expressed in the territories and it's there where they are going to be defended and built upon. So I think that as ideas to really help build the campaign and introduce some key issues, I can share in the chat later, but last year in October, we developed a campaign on the social function of the city, and in which was based on 5 key elements that I think resonate a lot of what have been spoken until now and will be further spoken. That are the right to housing, the right to community public services, and really enhancing this idea of community, and diverse and safe public spaces, the role of social solidarity economy, because I think that there has come an understanding of the need to tie the right to housing with access to services, but the importance of having decent livelihoods, I think it has not been stressed enough. And I think this is something that the APF is leading upon in the discussion, and it has to be put forward as well. A democratic collaboration. And again, as I was saying before, the right to enjoy the city and its opportunities as a whole. So just to conclude, I think that as we are talking from this cohesive and transversal view of rights, that the right to housing is tied to the need to the right to also access different services and really the opportunities that a community has, I think we can't ignore the idea of the right to remain, right? Because we need to remain, people need to remain in their communities and really attach themselves to the tissue of community that they are building and not be removed. So here the issue of evictions, as Yolande was saying, is key. And at the same time, just to conclude, I would like to react for the first thing we saw here today, that was the video from APF. And I think it was very interesting, the idea that was put forward of the right to dissent. And I think that this idea of right to dissenting has to do also with the right that we have to put forward other visions and other ways to construct our communities. And in this sense, I think that tensioning the ideas that are very important but need to be tension of participation and inclusion is key, because sometimes when we talk about participation and inclusion, we come from a view that puts a little bit the leadership only on governments and then adds the communities and the citizens. And I think that one of a key idea that is put forward by many organizations that are here present is really the leadership of these communities in putting forward these alternatives. In this, I can refer to Hicks' long-standing work on social production of habitat, in which Yolande can share much more, but I think really stressing the leadership with the support and resources of governments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sophia.
Mina just would like to alert that Eliza is back. So just wanted to alert you.
Yeah, that's okay. We spoke. Eliza will be there. She will participate after a bit. So, so thank you, Sophia. Now we have Cesare Ottolini, Global Coordinator, Alliance of International Inhabitants, which is a global network of associations and social movements of inhabitants, cooperatives, communities, tenants, house owners, homeless, slum dwellers, indigenous populations, and workers. So, Cesare, when I say 2 minutes, you can go up to 3 minutes, but after that, I will alert you. So please, Cesare.
Thank you, Mina. Thank you to the organizer for this important meeting as a key exchange, Europe, Asia. What kind of campaign to go to the right side from this portal unveiled by the COVID pandemic? We can discuss a lot, but without the people, the real people, the inhabitants, we can't obtain nothing. So for us is key strengthen the solidarity of the people, the inhabitants, the true people that are the roots of the city, the roots of the territory. So for that, as International Alliance of Inhabitants, we are strongly supporting the zero eviction campaign. Zero eviction campaign means a moratorium of eviction, no matter, because they are very key and strategic to save, to have the right to decide where stay and how, and then we can discuss what kind of policy. For sure, we are supporting the public service. So we have a campaign, we are discussing together with the International Public Service about a strong campaign on that. For sure, we are supporting the cooperatives, the social production of habitat. For sure, we are supporting the development of housing and cities with the respect, the full respect, not only of the human rights, but also of the environmental rights, because the climate change. And for sure, we are supporting the equality of gender. But for us is strategic. So for that, it's important to understand how join forces in Asia. Is not a little doubt about the capacity of the social organization all over the world in certain area, in certain region like Asia to support this kind of campaign. For that, I humbly suggest to have another session specific for Asia in order to discuss about that, because without that, unfortunately, the neoliberal, they have failed, but they are building the restoration. We are watching that all over the world. In Europe, they are putting a lot of money on the recovery plans, but not for restore the right to housing, for example, or the right to the protection, but to restore the banks. It's not the same. It's not the same. For us, the people have the right to restore, to rebuild. So enter to the right side, from the right side to the portal for the future. No more, no more. 2 minutes. Thanks.
Thank you, Cesare. Thank you so much. You're so right. I mean, clearly it cannot be done without the inhabitants. It cannot be done without people. It cannot be done without social movements, without protest, without resistance. And that is where hopefully we will head with this beginning. So now we have Rosalinda Frenio, associated with HomeNet Asia, an alliance of home-based worker organizations. She's based in Philippines. Rosalinda.
Good evening, everybody, or good day to all. I am representing sub-regional networks of home-based workers in both Southeast Asia and South Asia. And many of our sisters, especially in India, have shown us the way. For example, we have the Mahila Housing Sewa Trust, built by Sewa in Ahmedabad, 1.5 million workers. And there we learned that it is important to have women lead housing initiatives, especially for home-based workers, where the house is also a workplace, where you need the basic amenities like water, electricity, etc., to survive. And then we also learned that it's important to look at the climate crisis, and housing should also be climate proof, and there should be, renewable energy, smokeless ovens, and all that. So many of us have traveled to Sewa to see what's there. And I think one possible modality for a common campaign is for us to learn from each other. Maybe in a post-COVID era, we can see what's happening in other countries that are worth emulating. So in the Philippine case, we are involved in a multi-stakeholder project that really banners gender equality as a main component. And then, of course, it also includes empowerment of organized communities in a sustainable through a sustainable development approach. This is a 1 million housing project, and it involves a European donor, we may call it, or partner with the Swedish cooperative. So we are partnering with them, also with housing developers, with government agencies engaged in housing. But the base of all this are housing cooperatives that would be empowered to really represent themselves, manage the project, and also be capacitated. In India, the women were trained to be capacitated to be construction workers involved in building the houses. And in the Philippines, we also have women in the construction industry. So I think I would like to bring home that point that was already mentioned by earlier speakers, that when we talk about housing, we really need to tap the women who have proven themselves to be very productive and very empowered in many contexts, specifically in Asia, South Asia in particular, but now we have models too in Southeast Asia. So thank you very much for the time, and I hope I have contributed to the discussion.
Thank you, Rosalinda. You have indeed contributed tremendously. And one of the things that we did, we had a conversation a month or two ago on various these kind of projects, alternatives that have come up, that have been practiced, that have been designed and also implemented, in which many of the people in this in this discussion, in this group here, and we're also part of that. So maybe we will have more of those, and we must have definitely Seva. So now I call upon Kirti Shah. He is convener of Habitat of In Half, which is a habitat forum, a network of professional civil society organizations engaged in academic and research work in the human settlements development field. He is also associated with the ACHR, that's the Asia Coalition for Housing Rights. Kirti, 3 minutes for you, 2 to 3 minutes. Kirti Shah, are you muted?
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can. Yes.
Yeah. Now I have a 13-point strategy for inclusive cities and deliverable housing for all. Deliverable. I want to be able to kind of cover all 13, but I'll just mention a few of them. 1, formal affordable housing is not reaching the poor, inadequately sheltered, and homeless effectively, despite intent and effort. Number 2, the market cannot deliver land at affordable cost at desired location to the people in need. No strategy has worked. Nothing in the horizon looks like working. 3, the state intervention in making land available to the poor and the low-income section is completely inescapable. It has to happen. In India, it has been tried out on multiple forms over a period of last 56 years. Now, that doesn't mean that that is no denial of the land market, nor land's the money value or the economic asset character. It is an acceptance and establishment of the land's social value. Land is public good too, and it must be used for public purpose. That's the third thing. Fourth thing is this, that COVID's main expose of the city's underbelly is unhygienic and often inhuman living conditions in slums. And this must be dealt with immediately. This should happen in a time-bound manner, and it should happen in a manner where people are participating. Rental housing's total absence from the market must be addressed, and it's a serious anomaly. Housing missing people dimension from planning and development needs to be addressed. You require strategy for that. In addressing housing issue, not only the poverty, but inequality needs to be considered too. The issue is not only not having resources, it is issue of unequal and unjust distribution. Transport planning and mobility solutions are key to addressing the land, location, housing, and livelihood issues. Cities without slum is an achievable objective, and it's a deliverable goal. That will happen with citywide in situ upgrading strategy that should include secure land tenure, capacity building of local government for services provision, complete rejection of forced eviction option, seeing land and resource issue in the overall framework of the city, and a combination of curative, preventive, and futuristic strategy. And my last point is, cities' informality is in two forms: informal settlements and informal economy. And both authorities and the middle class are hostile to them, and they want them out of the city. That needs to be addressed, and it's possible to do so through creative synthesis and understanding that formal sector's productivity in the urban context is also because of its linkages with the informal sector and their productivity. So if these 13 points are addressed, you essentially have a way to some kind of sustainable solutions in the South Asia region. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirti. Amazing as usual. Thank you so much. Now I'll call upon Ryan Hassan. He's Executive Director of the NGO Forum on ADB, which is a network of civil society organizations monitoring projects, programs, and policies of the Asian Development Bank and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Ryan, 2 to 3 minutes.
I think he exited for some difficulty. Maybe he will, so we can go to the next speaker, Meena. Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Godson Mohandas, he is part of, is he here?
Yes, yeah. I'm here.
Wonderful. He is part of the Public Services International, the South Asia office. PSI is a global trade union federation of workers associated with public services, and Dr. Godson can tell us more.
Thank you very much, Ms. Meena. The previous speaker has given a lot of suggestions, so I won't go into the suggestion, but what PSI is doing, because I think not many people will be aware of what PSI, that is Public Services International, is doing. So during this pandemic, the housing as a fundamental right which is being denied in South Asia has been exposed in a very major way, because especially when you talk about public service workers in health, we can see that they are being discriminated, they are not given adequate shelter. So these are the problems which are brought out very openly during this pandemic, and PSI has been working even before the pandemic through its unions, public sector unions in their local areas. So we have an explosive sector called municipal, local and regional government sector, which caters to the housing needs of not only the public sector workers, but also the persons who are not having decent and dignified housing in their local areas. So this is one of the key points which PSI in South Asia as well as globally we rally upon. And the second is that we at the policy level, we try to counter the neoliberal tendencies which promotes market and other tax concessions to the private sector, which has raised the real estates, and instead of land being a public good, which is to be cementing equality and promoting some kind of justice in the society, but that has not been followed. So we normally rally through our networks to counter this neoliberal policies of the government as well as the IFIs. And third is very important is that we not only highlight these issues through campaigns and capacity building of unions, but we have an alternative called remunicipalization, which has been promoting in our network. That is how to reclaim the lost grounds, I should say, of the public sector involvement in housing, especially in land reclaimment. Because, for example, if you take in India, according to 2011 census, there are 8% of constructed house not occupied. It is still empty. So there have been instances where PSI has supported these remunicipalization initiatives in many countries to reclaim these kind of block houses. So in short, so we have been working on the housing rights under by supporting and promoting and highlighting the importance of local and regional governments, because these are the people who work directly in implementing the policies and the schemes of the government. So thank you, and I'll just show my face because I think so. Yeah. Thank you then. So I'll just put an end and keep the time limit. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we have Satoko Kishimoto from Transnational Institute. He is associated with the Economic Justice Program of the TNI, that's a Transnational Institute, which is an international research and advocacy institute based in the Netherlands. Satoko, 2 to 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mina. Oh, well, lovely to be here. I was really impressed to study the concept note of social justice cluster of housing. I think that the paper really reflects what we are discussing. It's really holistic approach. Housing is human rights. Housing is not commodity, and that's also so very much has to do with other related services. Well, I think what I have seen last, particularly since the pandemic, the kind of global emerging new discourse, let's say, the housing, energy, water, vaccine, and healthcare, should be understood as global public goods. So this departure point could connect different movements and the different regions to be united based on social justice and also the just transition strategy. So that's my the point number one. So I'm not housing expert or activist as such. However, for me, housing is a very strategic issue in many ways, as a previous speaker or the very rightly addressed. So I want to focus just two strategies, part of that. So one is deprivatization. So this is also coming in the housing area. In European big cities like Berlin and Barcelona, particularly, the local government really bravely they expropriate the private housing to protect residents. So this is the quite symbolic action. However, we think that's very important step forward, how the public authority can do to defend the living people. The second strategy, which I think that's more important in long term, is decommodification strategy. So that Eric also very beautifully put in that, like how the public agents, public institutions, and the government could really play a role of the increasing housing stock by working with citizens, particularly housing co-ops. So this is also not kind of the project by project approach, rather, they working with public civic innovation, we are calling, they're creating that kind of design, increasing, the stock of housing market together with housing, the cooperatives and housing cooperatives, tenant cooperatives. This is the strategy we want to study more to contribute to this discussion of right to housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Sotoko. After Sotoko, I call Koen de Tavernier, who is representing Inspire WSM, which is a global network of workers' organizations and promotes the idea of decent work and social protection. He is based in Brussels. Koen.
Thank you, Mina. Well, on the issue of housing proper, I cannot really speak on behalf of Inspire, since the housing issue as such we haven't discussed it yet thoroughly in our. And if I had known, which means check my emails a bit earlier, I should have given my speaking time maybe to brother Sami, who is also listening to us. Sami from Tamil Nadu in India. Anyhow, with Inspire, we do is try to connect different social movements, unions, health organizations, other grassroots social movements and NGOs to join the forces in the struggle for strong and broadly supported social protection, social protection for all. And one important element in our vision on social protection is the place for civil society in the establishment of social protection and also in the delivery of services. Social services, and of course this can also include social housing, when it's delivered on a not-for-profit basis and in the hands of the people themselves through their organizations, through cooperatives. Other speakers already gave some examples of this. In our vision would not just be a complement for failing governments, but can also be an important lever to build an alternative, more people-centered economy, would strengthen the economy, the autonomy, and the social and economic position of the people as agents of their own change, taking things into their hands, building an alternative people-centered economy. So I would, of course, agree with most of the points that already been made and raised by the other speakers. It is clear that housing, like other social rights, is an essential part of every comprehensive social policy. And that there is a big need indeed for more coherence between the different policy domains, maybe even between social policy domains. One thing is, for example, social housing, when there is sufficient social housing delivered on a not-for-profit basis, it can have a downward impact on market prices. Yeah? It can push prices down, and actually conservative right-wing political parties in Belgium, where I live, explicitly oppose more social housing because of this, because they know it can have this impact. Unfortunately, we're far away from any sufficient offer of social housing that could achieve and could have this impact. So it's quite clear that the interest of conservative parties is the interest that what they defend is the interest of the landlords and not of people in search for housing. Now, to conclude with Inspire, we won't become a specialized organization or network on housing. That's clear. Our focus will remain mostly probably on other elements of a social policy of social protection. So for us, the interlinkages with the other social protection policies might be the way we will look at an issue like housing. We discussed income security this morning. Health is a major issue also within the APF social justice cluster. And as an example for these interlinkages, how we could approach the issue and why it's important, other speakers have given other examples. But safe and healthy housing is a necessary condition for good health. Francine also told it already in her introduction. But it's also necessary for people to have like sufficient psychological certainty and peace of mind. Yeah, it's proven by research also in Europe that when you're not sure about a safe and healthy place to live, having no real place you can call home causes a lot of stress for people on a daily basis, and in turn is a major obstacle to being able to participate fully in social and economical life. It's a really big obstacle for finding a job, for holding on to a good job. It's even hampering the take-up of social rights, social allowances, training, care and support services, even where they are available. People who have this daily stress of not being sure where to live or not having a stable, safe place is having a hard time even to access all the other services and all the other elements of social protection. So through these linkages, I think with Inspire, we could, this is how we would look at an issue of housing and could join broader support for a campaign on housing for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Koen. And now we have Roland Kulke, who's a representative of Transform Network based in Brussels. Transform Europe is a recognized political foundation corresponding to the party of the European left. Roland, are you here?
Hi, sorry, usual question. Can you hear me? I'm sorry, I have a new microphone. You can hear me. Okay, wonderful. Yeah, thanks a lot that you allow me to take part. You might have seen me working because this evening I'm organizing event on housing, but for the European scale. You can see this really burning necessity to discuss this. And I have just talked maybe 2 hours ago with a colleague of mine in the European Parliament for broader exchange between Europe and Asia, what current debates would go on in the European Parliament. So yeah, I just want to thank you for this event. Honestly, for us here in Brussels, because the Belgian left party started just in April, campaign on the horrendous rent pricing here, and I can see the people living next to me in the area here in Brussels, mostly with migrant background. Migrant background in Europe means me, I'm a migrant, but as I am white, people assume I don't have a migrant background. Migrant background means in Brussels here, American and Turkish especially. and they are being forced out. And I have to be honest, forced out by people like me, like myself, who can afford higher prices. And I have seen these people here just outside my house, not house, sorry, a very small flat. You can see my room, going outside of their own small flats due to the Corona crisis. To be in safety means often to be in the public. And this is just incredible. So, yeah, we know the terms of Karl Polanyi, the three goods of artificial commodities. And one is money, one is labor, and the last one is land. And land has to stop being put on the market. We cannot solve the crisis without getting rid of a land market. It's just, it's incredible. So thanks a lot. It's a wonderful discussion, and I'm writing a lot and learning a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roland. And do share the link to your seminar in the chat box so that those who are interested can register and attend.
Yes.
It's not very convenient in terms of time for people in Asia, but I think up to South Asia, people might be able to attend if they stay up late. Yes. Now I call upon Michael Tellman. Michael is associated with ATTAC and based in Germany. ATTAC is an international organization involved in the Alter Globalization movement. Michael.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Because my connection is a little bit weak. Okay, so I think it's incredible, and it's marvelous that we are able to have a discussion on this global level, because so we are able to learn from one another, and we know from one another, and this to know that other struggles in other continents on the same issue with the same values, this can strengthen the national struggles too. So only the possibility to exchange here is a factor to strengthen the movements on housing. It's just said, you can't renounce air to breath, so you can't renounce housing to live. And that's why housing has to be a common and not a private investment. That focuses directly on the question of property. And I'm happy to tell you that the greatest movement in Germany, the housing movement in Germany, is not organized. It's a network, but it's not really focused on one issue. But the greatest movement is in the capital, in Berlin. And in Berlin, they focus on the property. They demand to that the greatest housing company has to be socialized, and they collected about 100,000 signatures for this demand in a few weeks. So that shows the question of property is not a theoretical question; it's practical in the struggles. Third, to limit the rents is also necessary to make living affordable. But as long as we have the private property, even we have progresses in limiting the rents, this progresses can be got back. And under capitalistic conditions, if you limit the rent, the owner will have retrenchment in maintenance, and new houses will not be rebuilt. Fourth, it's hard to succeed in socializing private real estate property. So the fights against vacating, the fights for affordable rents, for public housing are indispensable. But to limit the fight on these issues and not to try to get on the level of socializing the housing will not arrive at the real objective, and so we will rest in a defending state. What can we do practically? I began the exchange is the worth for all our movements, but the problem in housing are the international investors also. And so we can exchange and connect one another to fight against, for example, BlackRock or other international active investors. And so beginning with our discussion here, afterwards we can connect movements, and maybe we are able to have a coordinations of fights, or to have solidarity for one to another. So to develop our exchange to real international solidarity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. Now I call upon Samuel Anil Kumar. Samuel represents the Global Alliance of Waste Pickers. The Alliance is a networking process among thousands of waste picker organizations. There are groups in more than 28 countries. Samuel. 2 to 3 minutes.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to be part of this meeting. So, so I'm from the Global Alliance of Waste Pickers. I'm based in Andhra Pradesh of India. Actually, as you all know, most of you would have known about waste pickers. They're most vulnerable people, who are living, who are living in the dumping yards beside the roads. They are the most sufferers during COVID also. And the priority of the government with regard to the priority of the government is not housing. They have different other priorities, but there is a definite need for us to take up a campaign at the national and international level to bring this housing to the waste pickers, because we've been working with waste pickers from around 5-6 years, and we've understood that the situation is so bad. I just want to tell you what happened a couple of days ago. One husband passed were allowed into a house by the owner of the house. So this type of situation is happening in most of the places where though they are staying in a rented house, it is a problem for them to go there, because they're not allowing them to go inside, because there's a lot of discrimination towards people who are infected with COVID. And with regard to Andhra, for example, in Andhra Pradesh, we've been working there, and the recent government, which has come to power around 2 years ago, they're given 30 lakh houses. Their focus, the state government's focus was giving housing. But when we count the number of waste pickers who got housing, is very, very less. It's less than around 200, 300 out of 30 lakhs. This is mainly because the waste pickers are not able to produce the documents required, like Aadhaar card, which is very necessary, the housing, the ration card. So because they are not able to show these documents, they are not able to get housing. So there is a need for consistent advocacy with the government, state as well as the national, state, union government. We need to, and also we also were thinking about talking with the parliamentarians, saying that our issues are issues of waste pickers are spoken by, or these people take over there, they talk there in the parliament. So definitely this should be a regular process where a district level network, a state level network, a national level network should be formed, it should be strengthened, and the policy level advocacy should be done. And one more thing I just want to say is, just not a lie is not just enough. A political will is also needed, because though there are different laws, they're not implemented properly. So they definitely we should see that the law is being implemented properly. So thank you so much for the opportunity. I think time is over.
Thank you so much, Samuel. I will call Ryan in the next group. Ryan, if that's okay, I would just like to play some of the things that we had that we could start with doing before I call the next group of people to comment on what they have heard from the two main speakers and subsequently from all the networks, so that we can wrap it up and we can come to some conclusion. So I would request the people who will come now to comment on what discussions have happened, the suggestions, the offers of support, the kind of areas that they represent, and based on that, if how we can go ahead. So I'm going to start by placing a few ideas, so that then you can follow up with adding more or supporting or opposing anything that I might be putting forward here. So one of the things that I am suggesting is that we have a kind of mailing list, not an interactive mailing list, because many people complain about that. We will start with a mailing list, which is like a newsletter, and then we will issue every week. We can, the people who write back, we can then put it together and send it to you so that you don't get mails every day. So we send you a digest. So this is one suggestion, that we start a mailing list on housing. And this, of course, will include not just people from Asia, but also people from Europe. And we will, although we might have a focus on building the campaign in Asia, however, we are going to do this together and globally. So the mailing list. The second is whether we could start a bunch of webinars following one after the other, maybe once in 2 weeks, once in 3 weeks. Please comment on how often we can do that. Breaking this into various thematics associated with housing, with urbanizing, housing related. And we can think of the thematics. Maybe we could set up a group to organize these webinars, to look at putting the thematics in place, like say about 6 webinars, and then maybe come back to the group with a bunch of suggestions so the group can discuss it. So a bunch of webinars, and this could result in a set of basic publications which we could put up on a website, which the AEPF, not a website, a URL, which AEPF could create a space for us to be able to put these up there and also to continue our work. And I don't know whether Kathy is here, or but the communication team is represented here by Chandan. So we would expect Chandan to discuss this with the communication team and come back to us, if this is acceptable to all. The third thing is one of the things that we should do, perhaps a meeting like this, but including European movements, organizations, and think tanks, which now, as we can see, Roland has already started. Maybe Roland can take the initiative to also do it with the people who are part of this APF initiative. The time does not suit us right now. I don't know whether a time is possible which will suit both Europe and Asia. Hopefully we should try and find the time. So I would request, if maybe at the end of the discussion, if Roland can come back or put it in the chat box, whether he would be happy to take this initiative to do something on the issues that we have been focusing on just now. These are some of the ideas. Please come up with more. Please comment on what I have said so far, and also comment on what you have heard so far from the networks. So now I am going to call upon all of you to speak for just a minute each. We can always have another one. People can raise hands because there may be people who might want to come back. But now just a quick response for about a minute and a half from all of you. I will start with Ryan. Ryan is, I've already introduced him, so I'm not going to do it again, but Ryan works with, he is convener, he's executive director of the NGO forum on the ADB. Ryan.
Thank you so much. Just being mindful of the time. So the core issue for us, and I completely concur with the chat box. I mean, there's a real need for local community organizations and affected community groups displaced by infrastructure projects to link with a larger civil society movement on housing rights. This is fundamental. I'll just raise 3 issues which we are dealing with as a network. We have 5,000 families displaced by an urbanization project in ADB in Mongolia, Ulaanbaatar, in the middle of COVID. And these families have sort of been displaced from their ancestral lands and homes, and in the promise that they would be given better housing. And unfortunately, they've been sent out to the desert living in tents, and they haven't been pulled back in, and the Mongolian winters are harsh. It's -40. The entire collective bargaining aspect is being completely dismantled. The local government is trying to do individual conversations with each household and just giving them cash money without any civil society presence. So you can understand that there's a power imbalance, and a lot of people will be disenfranchised if those people are not in a collected front to bargain. Same story is happening to us in Nepal, just beside our hydropower power plant in Tanahu. 22 families have been staying together opposing the construction of the dam for this project. And we've delayed it for a year and a half. But once again, the negotiators are coming at us and want to do individual conversations with household members, thereby influencing, one family takes the money, 3 families don't, dismantling the community organizing. So when we are approaching AEPF and this broader housing rights conversation, we are encouraged with the fact that these struggles that we are having on the ground can find a larger voice. I love the idea which Meena shared, that potential seminars where we can bring in displacement of large-scale infrastructure through neoliberal projects and affected communities as probably a conversation which can build ties with the larger housing rights movement. I'll stop there as just a minute, and maybe looking forward to the strategy sessions afterwards.
This is the first strategy session. Okay, now I'm calling upon Rita. Rita Paduangi she teaches at Singapore University, and she works on the sociology of architecture, participatory urban development, and social movements. Rita.
Hi. Thank you so much. It's been great to hear from everyone. I guess, coming from Singapore, I'm very used to, being asked about, how is housing in Singapore and how is the government providing housing in Singapore. I guess it's one thing, it's one thing to look at. There's also a tendency in the region to actually look at Singapore as a model for housing provision, which I think at this point I'm sure that all of you already realize this, but I think we need to be careful with governments who are really into looking at models, because I really like the idea of having people-centered housing and placing the emphasis on people, because I know that it's important to work with governments, but at the same time, I feel that there is also a tendency of sort of if the government is playing like a very central role in this, not every place can sort of like emulate what Singapore has done, and there's also some downside of it as well. So for governments who want to, copy the Singapore model, for example, many of them don't realize that in Singapore, the government is the biggest developer. For example, the housing market is actually dominated by the government. And so those kinds of things are rarely, discussed if, in my interactions with some government officials that are really looking up to Singapore as the so-called model. So I really like the points. Again, I really like the points of having people at the center of housing, and I think that's the key to housing, to fulfilling housing rights for everyone in Asia. Maybe I'll stop there, Meena. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rita. Do comment upon the suggestions that have come as well, besides the other things you might want to say. Of course, you have only 1.5 minutes. It's difficult. Daniel Abunelis is with the Ecology and Social Justice Program of the Hendrik Paul Stiftung, Southeast Asia. Daniel.
Hi, thank you. I would like to pick up Ryan's point on displacement caused by infrastructure project. So my organization does not work directly on access to decent work, decent housing, but I think our work on social and ecological justice in the area of investment overlaps with decent housing. In mainland Southeast Asia, for example, the special economic zone have become a one-size-fits-all policy solution for governments wanting to expand their industrial economy. So they develop laws and policies that provide private investors with special privileges such as tax cuts and easy access to land for factories and other commercial enterprises. However, this is marred with human rights violations, such as land dispositions, which of course is a major barrier to access to decent housing and housing evictions as well. In most cases, communities do not have access to redress mechanism. Interventions recommended here by CSOs and advocates in the CLMVT, although not specific but crosscuts decent housing issue, is to develop national and regional campaign that will urge the government to conduct a thorough review of the performance of SEZs to inform policy. And of course, for investors to have the responsibility to employ due diligence measures to ensure that they are not complicit in rights violations. So this includes investors from Europe and also multilateral banks. I think that's it from my end.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Now I call upon Claudia Ehing from Vietnam, who's responsible for regional urban portfolio with Friederike Bert Stiftung. She's based in Vietnam. Claudia?
Thank you very much. It's also the first time for me to be invited to one of your roundtables. So it's really great to hear about the vibrant discussions that are going on about social housing. As Rita has already said, many countries in the region sort of look to Singapore as a role model. And since the approach of Singapore is also quite technocratic, FES has always tried to put forward a different approach, and that is the social city concept. And I don't know if many of you are familiar with it, but the social city concept is actually something that comes from Germany, and it's now the guiding concept for all urban development planning in Germany. And maybe I can just say what the three main pillars are. The first one is that it wants to support less developed urban areas to prevent social segregation. It provides investment in infrastructure, for instance, affordable housing, but also affordable transport. And another important pillar, which has already been mentioned by many of you, is the participatory decision-making processes as part of what in Germany is called neighborhood management. And this is not just confined to the provision of information, but it really wants to enable exchange and a lively debate, for instance, through organizing open town halls. And I think what was already mentioned, and I just want to highlight it once again, is that the Asia Pacific is also the most disaster-prone region in the world. And this is why we at FES, we have started to open up this social concept, this concept of the social city, and try to include also ecological aspects, and really talk about what does it mean to have climate-proof housing, to combine social housing with rooftop solar, or to create public spaces that are not shopping malls, but really green open areas that also help to cool down the city. And regarding a very concrete question, what I think about the proposals, I think it's a great idea to have these webinars where we can really dig deeper into specific topics. And if you want to learn more about the concept of social housing, I think it can really provide an interesting framework also in the response to COVID-19, because it's really this response where we take a look at disadvantaged parts of the city. So thank you very much, and I'll stop here as well.
Now we have Khalid Mahmood from Pakistan. Khalid is a labor rights activist and director of Labour Education Foundation. He is based in Lahore, in Pakistan.
Thank you very much, Meena. Thank you very much, Meena. And thank you all for very good presentations. What I have heard so far, it is very obvious that housing, especially in urban areas, is the biggest problem for the workers. Whether they are formal sector workers or informal sector workers, even in some countries like Pakistan, even the public sector workers also cannot afford a decent housing, even on the rental basis. So I think if we want to really go forward with this agenda, I think we have to look at housing not only with the broader social justice perspective, but minutely, I think, with the labor rights perspective as well, and maybe to include that into the demands of the workers and the labor movement how we can work together with the trade union and the labor movement to include this into their demands as well and work together with them. Secondly, I think we have to focus. I'm talking particularly with my experience from Pakistan. A housing issue is also linked with like provision of clean drinking water. And in Pakistan, more than 100,000 people die every year due to the waterborne diseases, and half of them are children. So I think we have to link these health issues, and I'm sure this is problem in other countries as well. So health issues, education issues are also need to be linked with the housing campaign. And finally, I would say we have to work on highlighting the nexus between the private land mafia owners or real estate developers and the politics. The people in politics who are ruling our countries are somehow linked to the real estate developers. And in Pakistan, the only thriving business at the moment is real estate development, and they are mafia. So we have to work on this to how we break this nexus, because they are making such policies which are great hindrance in provision of the decent housing for the poor, and especially for the urban poor. So I think we have to work on that as well. And I totally agree with the ideas put forward by Meena about the webinars, specialized webinars on different issues. And then we come together with some very focused publications so that we can build our campaigns on these ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Khalid. We have Lajana Manandhar from Nepal. She is the founder director of Lumanti Support Group for Shelter in Nepal. Lajana.
Thank you very much. It's a very good discussion going on. So because the time is short, I'll try to be very short. I think like in Nepal, the profile of housing is very low. So it is very important that we actually build the profile of housing, right? Although there's a policy and in the constitution, housing right is regarded as a fundamental right, but much has to be still done. So probably like, coming together, working together, sharing our experiences together, and also campaigning that will actually help build a profile, and that will have a positive impact in the housing and also in improving the living conditions of the poor people. So the many issues and many challenges already been actually expressed by the previous speakers. We do face all these challenges, and just to add on what has already been said, that there is a heritage, age-old ancient heritage settlement in Kathmandu Valley that actually facing eviction because of the planned proposed construction of expressway. That will actually not only destroy the houses, the old houses, traditional houses, but that will also destroy the culture, tradition, indigenous practices. That will all be gone if actually the eviction takes place. So people are fighting against that. The fight and struggle that actually continues, but then that will not only be harmful to the houses and the lives of the people, but also that will be detrimental to the environment as well. That is also our concerns, and we have been talking about it. Right. Another point here is so the impact of disasters. So we had a big earthquake in 2015 after 6 years after earthquake. So people have not been able to complete the reconstruction. There are still many poor families, the leftovers, like the people who have not been able to build houses are the poorest, the most marginalized families. They still haven't been able to build the houses. Right. And I think so we also have to see when we talk about the houses, how do we help the poorest, the most vulnerable ones who have been impacted by disasters, by earthquake or by typhoon or floods or whatever it is, the natural disasters. The people, the families affected by them, impacted by them, how do we help them to build, to reconstruct as early as possible, as fast as possible, in the speediest way. I think that is also very important to house the people. And also the last point I would like to mention is see, we talked about the access to land. So the good thing happening here in Nepal is actually the government has actually formulated a policy to provide access to land, to give ownership of land to the slum dwellers, the people who have been living in the slums for the last 10 years. Now they will be owning a land. The government has actually started surveying of the people. The survey has actually started, and then they are also working in collaboration with the local communities and also with the local government. So they are trying to now identify, to make a list of the people, like, and then they will be giving them the ownership to the land. This is a kind of like a revolutionary kind of like, decision the government has actually taken. And the people are also very much positive that the slum dwellers especially are very happy with this, and they're hopeful that, the land will be actually given to them, they will have the ownership. But then the challenge is like, how do we integrate ownership to land with housing and integrated settlement? That is still a challenge. Okay, very briefly, I'll stop here now.
Thank you, Lajan. I'm sorry. We will have more opportunities to share the experiences of each country. We don't have much time for that just now, and you won't be able to do justice to it as well, because we are able to give so little time. So now we have Varghese Tekinath from India. He is based in Hyderabad. He is a housing rights activist. He is also part of the international advisory team of the Alliance of International Inhabitants. Varghese.
Thank you, Meena. And it has been great being present here, listening to great presentations. One thing that I thought was running through many of the presentations was how to make housing affordable, how to make housing adequate, and how to balance both these. In the context of the pandemic, there are many issues. Well, there is a good housing scheme that has come up in the context of the city that I live in, but that is aside. But many inadequacies that have come up in the whole housing policy and in the whole housing scheme. I want to highlight a few of these before I comment on the proposals that Meena and others have made. One, in the context of the massive migration that took place, the need for cheap rental housing became very, very important. And the responsibility of employers to provide housing to their employees, this became highlighted immensely during this period of the pandemic. Housing, at least in India, is still not a human right. The successive governments have denied this housing as a human right, in spite of the many judgments that are there in favor. But housing remains a scheme, which would also mean there is no adequate budget that is there, and often the schemes are dependent on governments. So the need to highlight housing as a human rights becomes very, very important in the context of the pandemic. As many mentioned, housing and livelihood and workplace are so interlinked. In this context, in situ housing becomes extremely important issue. So also land, how to protect the land that is still in the possession of the poor in the slums that they dwell in, because there is commodification of land that is taking place, and many of the social housing schemes are placed far out from the city that compromises the right of people to work. So how to protect land that is still in their possession, and how to get more land so that social housing can become important. Zero evictions as a policy, a moratorium on housing becomes extremely important. There have been many evictions that have taken place even during this period of the pandemic in many parts of India. This is something that is, one of the things that came up is the many housing in a city like Hyderabad, where 1/3 of the population of the city of 9 million live in the slums. People who became COVID positive, they had no place to isolate themselves. So the entire families had the pandemic and the virus. And there have been many families that have been wiped out in the process, all of them dead. So this is obviously participation. Yeah, obviously participation. I just two things in terms of suggestions that I want to make. One is how to make housing rights network in Asia a very strong movement. We still do not have a housing rights network in Asia that links us together, that unites us together. Similarly, how to campaign for a moratorium on housing and how to protect, create a link in Asia that would protect people who are faced with evictions. Along with the other suggestions that Meena has made, I would add these two. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Varghese. Sorry to everybody to be, because we have so many people, we want to include everyone. So now we have Felix Anderi, works as a research associate at the Peace Institute in Frankfurt. He represents the foundation called Asian House on the International Organizing Committee of the APF. Felix.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to quickly pick up on what Michael Tellmann's contribution before was. He has alluded to the housing movement in Berlin, and I just wanted to emphasize the lessons from this movement that may be interesting to struggles elsewhere. Berlin has been one of the greatest centers of gentrification in Europe. Lots of people are getting evicted by housing investors, which get rid of tenants so that they can scale up these houses into luxury apartments. Homelessness is a big issue, and Berlin is also a center of the vibrant refugee movement. The movement here was extremely successful in mainstreaming the right to housing for all, precisely because it was able to combine the different struggles by tenants, homeless people, and illegal refugees, and bring them together under one conceptual frame. Furthermore, it also used the grain of populism against investors, particularly Deutsche Wohnen, a company which owns over 160,000 flats. One of them I'm speaking from right now. The movement was so successful that the progressive government in Berlin introduced a rent cap, that is a maximum price per square meter. And that was a huge success for the movement. But as expected, it also made conservative politicians and companies nuts, raging that the law would undermine the rights of owners. And they won. Just 2 months ago, the German Supreme Court decided that Berlin has no right to decide in this matter because it would need national legislation to go along. As Michael has already said, the movement is now proposing a new initiative to expropriate all landlords with more than 3,000 flats. And if the number of 175,000 is reached, all Berliners will decide about the plan in a referendum. So what I want to stress with that is there's a need for both, a broad mobilization across different struggles and a good strategy to navigate institutional and judicial aspects of their cause. Because what we've seen with many movements is that they get disillusioned after a short while when they get the feeling that nothing changes anyway. Therefore, mobilizing strategies and concrete tactics for making material wins need to go hand in hand. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Felix. Now I call upon Marina Joseph from India. She works with the Youth for Unity and Voluntary Action, YUVA, based in Mumbai. In India, she works on housing, livelihood, environment, and governance. Marina.
Thank you, Meena. It's been absolutely fascinating to listen to.
Somebody, just a moment, Marina. I think somebody, Chandan, could you mute everybody's mics, please?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Marina, please.
Yeah, so I just have 3 points to make. One is everyone's presentations today. It's become quite clear that if a campaign across Asia and Europe wants to work, there is one thing that it needs to do fundamentally, and that is.
Marina, we can't hear you. Marina, we can't hear you.
Just turn off my video. Can you hear me now? 1 second.
I think, Marina, it's your sound from your side.
Yeah, because everybody's muted.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes, Marina, please.
Yeah. Okay, so I just have 3 points to make. The first one is any campaign across Asia and Europe, one would need to look at the similarity and the commonality with regards to housing, and that has normalized this very broken housing system. And that is the economic system that is fundamentally reliant on land that is occupied by the urban poor. So that is one aspect that we need to come together on, challenging that economic system. And the speaker before me, I was actually quite fascinated by what Felix just mentioned. The other thing is within this structure that we then look to sort of change within through the campaign, we also need to look at how do you have create an imagination of housing, you know, an alternative imagination of housing, because at the local level there is a lot that is being done, you know, but these are just local level efforts at the end of the day. If we look at the large volume of people that are still homeless, that are evicted from their housing, etc. And the third thing is, when people talk about the right to remain within this imagination of housing, one thing that needs to be done is how do you criminalize the act of evictions or forced evictions, whether it is, you know, forced evictions of slum dwellers, people living in apartments, etc. It is absolutely shocking that it is so normalized across the world that you can evict someone from where they live and not be held accountable for it. So if there is something that needs to change, it needs to change within our housing imagination. And there are multiple things to do. How do you look at housing within social protection systems? It is not enough to just be providing relief during the pandemic if people don't have homes to live in. So while we start with the economic system, the smaller term gains that need to be looked at are as powerful, and that can only come about if we look at changing the way the campaign should look at changing the way housing imagination is seen. Yeah, that's all. Sorry, I couldn't turn on my video. I know I've just been getting this.
No problem, Meena.
Thank you, Marina. That was good. And although there seems to be some noise out here and we couldn't hear everything very clearly, but anyway, we are going to be recording everything, and we are going to be working on putting things together. All the suggestions, we will kind of, you know, organize it. Now I call upon Lara Shankar Chandra. She's the strategy director of strategy at Habitat for Humanity at the India office. Lara. Lara?
Yeah, I'm not going to be with my video. I just have some connection problem. Thank you for organizing this, Chandan and Meena, and really nice to hear the national and international views on housing for the urban poor, for the migrant population that are have moved from the urban centers to the rural districts. Especially in this entire COVID year, where we have seen and as my fellow panelists have spoken about, the need for regularizing informal housing in the urban centers, for regularizing the rent in informal settlements, for also looking at the fact that whether home improvements and improvement in slum living is one solution, but where relocation is happening, we need to be looking at the complete livability aspect for people who are relocated. And that is something that Habitat for Humanity India has been working in outside areas of Delhi, in Balaswa, Bhavana for the past 10 years, where we have built over 800 homes for people who have been moved out of the city center. Currently, we are increasingly partnering with governments in improving the livability of people in urban slum centers in Odisha, uh, and the third aspect where we are looking at is partnering with governments, where the government is providing the land for housing for the poorest people in the states of Odisha, Andhra Pradesh, and we're also seeing that it is going to be happening in Punjab and Ahmedabad. So what is important is really to have multiple points of solution in the urban and the rural. It is really good that people from different walks of different areas of intervention in housing in urban and rural are on this platform, so that various solutions can be put forth, and certain solutions and partnerships to the government can be highlighted in different contexts. For us, really a multi-stakeholder partnership approach, and also different approaches in different contexts work. We are definitely looking at the involvement of the private sector and the financial sector in scaling solutions for affordable housing for the informal sector and for the rural sector. And that is what Habitat for Humanity India is looking to do. In terms of talking about urban planning and urban development, I think our partners like MHD, and we voiced their concerns about improving households for women, especially because they are home-based workers. We also prioritize housing for single women-headed households and also women in difficult situations. And lastly, housing for people who are affected by disasters, and moreover, indigenous and tribal communities who are living in disaster affected areas. We have done a lot of work in Tamil Nadu in this regard, and what is exciting is that the government is partnering with organizations like Habitat in bringing, housing solutions, housing schemes to be implemented through multi-stakeholder partnerships. So a lot of work done across the country, and a lot of learnings and insights. But something that we ourselves are grappling with is the implementation of rental housing in the urban. And
Lara, you're out of time. You're out of time. Sorry.
Yeah. So really looking for more solutions in rental housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Lara. Now I call upon Nausheen Anwar from Pakistan. Nausheen is the director of Karachi Urban Lab. He is also network director of Climate Change and Urban Violence Network. Nausheen.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be a part of this forum, and absolutely fabulous conversations. And thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this. So I'll just very quickly highlight certain issues. So housing commodification, land commodification in Pakistan, nothing unusual. It resonates with many of the other different kinds of dynamics that people have already expressed across South Asia, across Asia, and even to a large extent in Europe. In the city that I work in predominantly, that I use as a lens to understand and unpack a lot of these issues concerning inequality, housing, displacement, etc., is Karachi. So I will just speak from that particular vantage point. So in this context, in urban Pakistan today, some of the more complex issues concerning housing rights, which is very much a part of political patronage and not really seen as an issue of housing rights, is now dovetailing with climate change related and risk mitigation related issues. So we're beginning to see the landscape or the triggers for evictions and displacements changing and aligning with this issue of risk management, disaster management, etc. So just in the last 2 months, almost 50,000 people have been evicted from their homes in this city, and many more are continuing to be evicted along particular drainage channels or natural waterways that are part of the city's ecology. And these issues are not being brought to attention on an international or global scale, albeit there are many, many different kinds of leftist organizations and civil society organizations that are trying to stave off evictions. So I'd like to highlight this issue of climate change risks dovetailing with housing, shelter-related risks in issues in very complex ways. Secondly, my particular lab, which is part of a public sector university, is involved in a very extensive research on heat and global warming in cities across not only Karachi, but also Jakarta and various other cities in the global south. And we did a quick survey last year on containment and COVID and housing, low-income housing. And we found some very interesting correlations between global warming in cities like Karachi. Karachi is very much urban Pakistan, and Pakistan in general, very much in the eye of the storm, one of the highest in the climate change crisis, the highest sort of vulnerable countries in that sense. And housing, rather than as a place of shelter, was actually under COVID and containment, not really a safe place. So heat management, global warming, what are the impacts of global warming now in terms of shelter-related issues and housing-related issues? This is something that we are particularly concerned with at the lab, right? Because the climate change-related issues are becoming particularly complex. So how does heat and global warming impact shelter today? And what are we talking about when we talk about sustainable housing in this context, in addition to housing rights? So I would be very interested going forward in perhaps thinking about thematic issues such as housing and heat, affordable housing and heat. What is sustainable and affordable housing and shelter in the context of global warming? I welcome the idea of becoming part of a larger, broader coalition in urban Pakistan. I think this is very much missing. I see certain other Pakistani representatives as a part of this conversation, but not enough in my opinion. There need to be more. And being added onto the mailing list is a brilliant idea. So I welcome that too. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nosheen. And we have come to the end of our list. I am really sorry we cannot have responses now, but I can promise you, as the people who have put this together, which includes Eliza, I don't know whether Eliza would like to say a few words at the end, because she was supposed to actually co-chair with this session. So I will request Eliza just say a few words at the end to wrap up this session. Eliza.
Okay. Again, apologies to Mina because suddenly I have to bail out because of the blackout. Apparently our capital have the blackout, but only in my area, I guess. So I didn't follow the first session, which is the keynotes, but throughout the session, I saw that we have these similar struggles, either being evicted or being overpriced or being expulsed or experiencing expulsion. Now it's not only urban poor, but also middle class. So we are now, we can also reach the class solidarity that probably couldn't happen in the past, because before it's either between urban poor and urban poor, but now also experiencing with the middle class as well. And then I think it's also important to know what happened, the struggle that happened across the globe. So like, for example, I know what happened in Karachi because I'm connected to Nosheen through Karachi Urban Lab. So I know there's an eviction and there's also victims. I think yesterday in Orangi Mula, sorry for my pronunciation, in Karachi. And then 4 hours ago, I learned about eviction because of the rail track in Phnom Penh, because I was in the same workshop with a human rights activist from Phnom Penh. Then I learned a lot about struggle in Berlin, but not many people know about all of that because it's not in the one platform, because the knowledge is all only between us, maybe only between your peers, but never really on the map. So there is a map, but never really enough information about what happened, the struggle, and then we never really know about the number of the victims, for example. So apart from the suggestion that already put amazingly by Mina and also others, maybe we should put those kind of information as well in one, I don't know whether it's platform or maps or everything that's happened every day, and it's not okay, and we have to stop it and work together. So as a part of the class solidarity, that now is the time to move forward other ways, that we have to go back and return to the same vicious cycle again and again. So I guess this is my comment. Thank you, Mina.
Thank you, Eliza. Eliza, I didn't introduce you. She's executive director at the Rujak Center for Urban Studies, which is a non-profit think tank which works to promote co-production of knowledge and sustainable urban regional development in Indonesia. So I would just like to end by saying that we will get back to you. I would like to thank those who have been part of putting this together, which is Anju Manikot, Eliza, and Rita Padawangi, all of you, and Chandan, and Kathy, and the others who have helped to host this and to co-host this. Thank you very much. We will form this list. And if you feel that you're getting too much mail, you're welcome to come back, and because we are not allowed to put you into a list without your. So we are going to put you in there, and then you can get out if you don't want to be there. But we promise that it will not be interactive, and we will only send you occasional digests of what is happening on that. And the thematic webinars, I request those who are interested in working on these thematic webinars to please write to us. Chandan, could you put your email there? Maybe everybody has your email, but to get back to us suggesting thematics, offering your services in organizing a thematic webinar, and then we can do all the needful. The only translation that we had this time was Bahasa, but we can do other translations, hopefully in consultation with the rest of the APF team and with the organizing committee. Maybe we can manage to do that as well. But right now, it doesn't cost much to do these, and we can, a number of us can get together like we have done today. I think it's amazing. We have been about 28 to 30 people who have been in this conversation. Thank you so much for your patience. Thank you so much for not getting impatient, for being stopped if you didn't get enough time, but we will have more time in the future. Thank you.